The document felt thin in Silas Cole's hand, but its terms were ironclad. He stood opposite Eliza Gable in the dusty land agent's office in Three Forks Crossing, the Dakota sun striping the floor between them. Neither of them looked happy, but neither looked away. 6 months, the agent, Mr. Abernathy, repeated, his pen scratching the final date. From this day, April 1st, until the 1st of October, Mrs. Gable will act as caretaker for the Cole homestead. In return for her labor, maintaining the cabin, tending the garden and livestock, she will receive lodging, a 1/3 share of the preserved harvest, and a final payment of $20 upon Mr. Cole's return. Eliza watched Silas's face. He was a man made of straight lines and quiet angles, his expression as unreadable as the prairie horizon. A former Army scout, they said. He needed someone to keep his new claim from being swallowed by the wilderness or opportunistic squatters while he completed one last mapping commission. She, a widow since the winter's fever took her husband, needed a place to be. It was a transaction of mutual desperation, stripped of all sentiment. She appreciated that more than any offer of pity. "The terms are agreeable, Mrs. Gable?" Silas asked. His voice was low and even, like stones settling at the bottom of a creek. It held no warmth, but it held no judgment either. "They are," she said, her own voice firm. She would not be a charity case. She was a partner in a business arrangement. He nodded once, a short, decisive motion. He slid the document and the pen across the desk to her. Her signature was neat, practiced. His was a bold, spare slash of ink. They stood, and he offered his hand. His palm was dry and calloused, his grip brief and solid. There was no pretense in the contact, just the sealing of a bargain. They both knew what this was not. It was not a rescue, not a kindness, not the beginning of anything, but a temporary solution to a practical problem. The 1st of October was a long way off, a definitive endpoint on which they both could rely. He took her out to the homestead that afternoon in a borrowed wagon. It sat on a rise overlooking a shallow, fast-moving creek, a small, sturdy cabin of newly hewn pine logs that smelled sharply of sap and effort. It was unfinished, the gaps between the logs waiting for chinking, but the roof was sound, and the door hung true. He walked her through the property with an economy of both words and movement. "The well is here. It's deep, but could be deeper. The water is sweet," he pointed. "The 2 mules are in the corral. The gray one is Judas. He's stubborn. The chickens are yours to manage. Their feed is in the lean-to." Inside, the cabin was a single room, impeccably clean and starkly empty, save for a cot, a table with 2 chairs, and a small stack of books. The shelves he had built into the wall were perfectly level. She ran a finger along one. "No wobble. I leave at dawn," he said, standing by the door. He did not look at her, but at the western sky, already bleeding orange. "There's a supply wagon from Three Forks that will pass by on the 1st of each month. I've arranged a line of credit for anything you need." "I'm accustomed to making do," Eliza replied, her hands clasped in front of her. The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. "I know," he said, and it was the first thing he'd said that seemed to acknowledge her as a person rather than a contracting party. Then he turned and was gone, leaving her alone in the house that was not hers, to wait for a man she did not know. The days fell into a rhythm, dictated by the sun and the soil. Eliza worked from dawn until dusk. She mixed mud and straw and chinked the cabin walls until they were airtight. She broke new ground for the garden, her shoulders aching with the satisfying burn of labor. She learned the specific infuriating logic of Judas the mule and the particular cluck of the hen who was the best layer. The homestead was a living thing, and she was its steady, beating heart. She did not think of Silas Cole. Not really, but she saw him everywhere. She saw him in the precise dovetail joints of the window frames, in the way he'd stacked the firewood so it would dry evenly, in the worn handle of the axe that was weighted so perfectly it felt like an extension of her own arm. He was a man who did things correctly, who planned for the future, who did not cut corners. His character was written in wood and stone all around her. In late July, a summer squall blew in from the north, a furious, black-bellied storm that turned the sky to twilight at noon. The wind howled, and a bolt of lightning struck the ancient cottonwood by the creek. A massive limb cracked and fell, a gunshot in the deluge striking the corner of the cabin. The sound of splintering wood was followed by the drip, then the steady trickle of water onto the floor. Working by lantern light, soaked to the bone, Eliza wrestled a heavy canvas tarp over the gash in the roof, nailing it down with planks. She moved the flour and sugar away from the leak, her movements swift and efficient. She was capable. She was handling it. But as she stood in the damp, chilly cabin, a hot, unfamiliar anger rose in her throat. It was an anger at him for being gone, for leaving her to face the storm alone. The feeling was as illogical as it was powerful, and it frightened her. This was a job. Her feelings had no place in it. The supply wagon brought a letter in August. His handwriting was like his signature, spare and functional. Heard there was bad weather near the Black Hills. Trust all is well. Will return on schedule. S. Cole. She read the few words a dozen times. Trust all is well. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of faith. Faith in her. A strange warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the last of her storm-born resentment. She penned a reply just as brief. Roof damaged in the storm. I have repaired it. The garden is producing well. E. Gable. She didn't mention the fear, or the anger, or the loneliness. She just reported the facts. A caretaker to a landowner. As August bled into the gold of September, the homestead began to feel less like his and more like theirs, or perhaps just hers. She found a small, crudely carved songbird tucked away on the highest shelf, its wooden form worn smooth. She found the patch of stubborn wild roses he'd left to grow by the woodpile, a slash of defiant color against the brown earth. These were not the actions of a man who saw land only as a commodity. One afternoon, Judas, living up to his name, decided to lie down in the middle of the yard and refused to move. Eliza coaxed. She pulled. She threatened. The mule simply flicked his ears and closed his eyes. Exasperated, she sat on the ground beside his great warm bulk, pulled a crisp apple from her apron pocket, and took a loud bite. Fine, she said to his impassive flank. You rest. Lord knows you've earned it doing nothing all day. The mule's ears swiveled. He opened one eye. Then, with a groan that seemed to come from the center of the earth, he heaved himself to his feet and nudged her hand, his soft lips searching for the apple. Eliza laughed. A real, full-throated laugh that startled the chickens and felt foreign in her own chest. She gave him the apple, and in that simple, ridiculous moment, she realized the cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was home, and the 1st of October was no longer a release date. It was a threat. The morning of October 1st dawned painfully bright and cold. A frost had silvered every blade of grass. Eliza rose before the sun, her stomach a tight knot of dread. She performed her chores with a mechanical precision, her mind blessedly blank. She swept the cabin floor one last time. The pantry was full, jars of beans, corn, and pickled beets gleaming like jewels on the shelves. Her small bag was packed and sitting by the door. She had polished the table and, on it, placed the cabin key and a neat ledger of her expenses. Her part of the bargain was fulfilled to the letter. All that was left was to leave. She waited all day, watching the long road from the window. He appeared in the late afternoon, a lone rider silhouetted against the setting sun. He looked thinner, his face tanned to leather by the wind and sun, but he sat his horse with the same unyielding posture she remembered. He dismounted, his movements unhurried, and stood for a long moment, just looking. His gaze swept over the mended roof, the harvested garden beds, the neatly stacked firewood that reached the eaves. He gave a quiet nod, though to whom she couldn't say. He entered the cabin without knocking. The air grew thick, heavy, with everything unsaid. His eyes found her standing by the cold hearth, then flicked to her packed bag by the door, and finally to the key on the table. He walked over to the pantry and looked at the full shelves, a season's worth of her labor captured in glass. He turned to face her. His voice was rough, as if he hadn't used